Hola a todos, muchas gracias por estar hoy aquí, nos hace muchísima ilusión teneros en ese espacio que hemos creado desde The Creative Agency, en el que semanalmente nos entrevistamos con grandes líderes nacionales e internacionales, grandes visionarios que de alguna manera lo que hacen es compartir sus visiones con nosotros e inspirarnos. Hemos tenido a gente como Robert Palstein, Gerd Leonhardt, Salim Ismail, Austin Kleon, Paula Scher, Hans Ulrich y muchísimos otros, y hoy nos hace muchísima ilusión tener con nosotros a Stefan Sagmeister, que seguramente es el diseñador gráfico de referencia, ¿no? Digamos el más admirado y el más respetado. Así que, just a few words in English before starting. Stefan, for me, and I think for most of us, is one of the most respected and admired designers. He's worked in a great amount of projects for brands, for institutions, for companies, and also in very important and relevant personal projects. He has this talent of somehow not only always fascinating with his projects and touching and surprising, but also sending a message that remains, creating a voice somehow. No? So we're very happy to have him here. We're going to be chatting with him for an hour. So ladies and gentlemen, let's begin. Hello, Stefan, how are you? It's so nice to have you here. Has this big chaos had any positive effect on you?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it's, you know, I work every day. I think not only do I work more than before, just on an hourly basis, but I'm also more productive. There are less interruptions. The little crap that always takes up time in your day, much of that has fallen off. Some a good part of that, of course, I was lucky enough to already put onto the shoulders of Jessica Walsh last summer. So in many ways, of course, I was also lucky because I already had a very carefully, very beautifully put together studio above my apartment. I mean, I, you know, take up a spiral staircase and I'm in the studio. And I would think that, I mean, for sure for me, but I think that that is true for pretty much everybody, is that the fact that I did put a lot of love and care into the design of my studio and the design of my apartment now, of course, really pays dividends. And I can definitely see and know that my productivity is affected by it. My everyday mood is affected by it. I also take care that I make my bed properly. I dress properly.
You shower?
When I'm yes, thank you very much. Yes, I do. But also in the evenings when when I'm done with the studio work, I redress for hanging out. I myself am quite afraid of all this becoming one big mush, you know, of hanging out in my sweatpants on the sofa, answering emails. It's not what I want to do. And I find this sort of separation really working well for me.
What is your routine?
I get up early. I'm up normally at 6, roughly. And I now do an exercise up on my roof, which was invented by my good friend Chris Milk. Chris Milk is was one of the best video directors, music video directors, and then switched over very big time into virtual reality, and he has a couple of virtual reality companies. And when I saw that he has an exercise company now, I had to order the Oculus, and now I'm looking.
I would love to see that. I would love to see it.
Glasses on, shooting huge balls out of the air in some gorgeous landscape somewhere in the world, where you can choose if you're in the Galapagos Island or on the top of the Austrian Alps. It's hilarious, but it works really well, and my muscles are sore. So
instead of the running in the high line, no? Now you do your
Yeah, I actually was part of a call with the Highline yesterday. And of course, that's closed. It's just because it's so long and so narrow, there is no social distancing going on there. So they're closed, but they've showed a lot of pictures on how the Highline is doing without any gardeners. And it's still doing well. I mean, it's still looking absolutely gorgeous. Yes. Yeah. It's so, and of course, there's also no date yet of when that possibly might open.
Yeah. So after your exercise, you go straight to work?
After I do take, thanks for the reminder, I do take a shower. And then I'm pretty much at work normally before 8. And I, as always, I work on the things that are difficult before. And basically, and you know, I have a little list of things to get done that day. And if I have 8 things on it, I quickly order them on, depending on how much I don't want to do them. The stuff that I really don't want to do comes first and second and third. And yeah, exactly. And I work myself.
I was, I don't know who that was, but I was listening to an interview that said, everything you need to get done in one day, you have to do it before 12. If not, it doesn't get done.
And it's definitely, that was my experience. And so mostly in the afternoon, it's easy things, like stuff that's, you know, that's either executing something or stuff that's more time consuming, but ultimately easy to do, where I can play music and just basically, you know, do it. And then roughly, I pretty much work through now roughly until 6. So that's, you know, I get about 10 hours in, which is definitely more than I've done in a while. And at 6, I pretty much every day have some sort of Skype dinner. It's different groups. Some groups that I have only every second week. Some groups I have weekly. We try to keep them small, not more than 4 people, sometimes 5 or 6. But I find if it becomes larger, it's difficult. It just becomes too big of a hassle. And I really enjoy those.
Nice.
It's everybody orders dinner in, sometimes from the same restaurant. And
nice.
It's yeah, I really enjoy those. And then after 8, it depends on. I might read something or I might watch something. Meaning on both sides. I mean, obviously, there have always been an unbelievable, endless amount of really good books. Now I think we've seen that definitely also that sort of deep offering also online. I mean, for me, it's an absolute miracle how so much quality things can be available at the same time. Meaning, I've never had as much time in my life to watch things online, and the quality is super high. Meaning, it's still, I watch very little. I watch very few things that are crap. It's just, I find that amazing. Also knowing, having made one documentary film myself, or having been involved in that, how unbelievably difficult it is to do. Meaning, it's just, I got such an appreciation of the difficulty in the making of them. And so, yeah, there is an incredible amount of fantastic, talented people out there.
I was going to ask, I mean, everyone knows that you take a sabbatical year every 7 years. And I was going to ask, but I'm afraid I already know the answer. If you had something, like some time off to do something that you usually do on the sabbatical year during this time. Has it been this way?
Yeah, for sure. No, this is definitely, meaning, you know, I would say in general, now that I don't do any more commercial work, my life has become quite sabbatical-like. Like, you know, I'm working, I'm productive, but it's basically like I'm not involved in anything that I'm not interested in. That doesn't mean that all things are easy, not at all, because some of the stuff that I'm interested in is super difficult to do and sometimes becomes a pain to do and all that.
Mm.
But in general, there is not a single thing that I'm working on where when it becomes difficult, I have to ask myself, why am I doing it? Like, you know, there is no question about that, because I do ask that question properly if I decide before I'm gonna do it or not. So I'm of course also extremely aware I'm in a very privileged position. You know, yeah.
Would you say you're much happier?
So I have to say that the last, whatever that was, 2 months roughly now that we've been in quarantine here, have been very good months. Yes, yeah, I can definitely say that. Yeah, you know, I still do get out, like on the weekends, where now that travel is not possible, we basically try to explore or to travel to unknown places in New York City. You know, last weekend we had a picnic at Grant's Tomb. It's a big sort of like Civil War monument on the, you know, I think it's on 120th Street, very much in the northwest of Manhattan. Week before we went out to the Unisphere in Queens. That was the, you know, the remnants of the 1964 World's Fair. This weekend I have a whole tour planned to places in Brooklyn that I've never been to, like checking out the cemetery. We're gonna go and see the grave of Basquiat and of Fellini and such. And there's also a couple of neighborhoods that I heard interesting things about, but just never had a chance or a chance to go, or, you know, felt that there were always more interesting things somewhere else in the world to see. So we're doing tourism in the hometown.
Nice.
It's also, of course, New York City is deep enough a city that even though I've been living here for 30 years, you can still really detect absolutely new things and that are interesting. So I'm not complaining. No.
We as humans, most of the times don't change until we are forced to change, not to transform. Now we have had like this big reason to transform ourselves. How have you surprised yourself? What has changed in you?
Well, I mean, as I mentioned, my daily design life hasn't changed all that much. So I would say that obviously all travel and all exhibition has changed radically. Like, you know, our exhibition in Hamburg was closed early. The one in Austria has been moved to 2022, so has been moved by 2 years. Obviously all my talks, workshops and all that stuff is gone. I would say it's a bit surprising that I don't miss it. Not at all. Like, I've been definitely one of the people that has been traveling heavily before. And I think one of the people who used that travel as a springboard also for ideas. You know, like I always found that if you're in a city for 4 or 5 days and you have a couple of extra days, those extra days, if you do work on some ideas, sometimes yield good results because you just it's a new environment, and, you know, like you're not feel as bound to what you're used to as normally. And right now, I'm meaning, who knows, like I could also imagine that when the time comes where travel is possible again, that if I do travel, that I do feel, oh, I missed it. But right now, not at all. Not at all.
You know what I think, Stefan? That sometimes, because this happens to me too, I don't really miss anything from the other. I'm doing fine. So you know what I think? That sometimes it is like this instinct of surviving. You know, it's like that's what is there. So you have to adapt to this. No? So you make the best out of it. No?
Yeah. It's like an immune system for the mind.
Exactly. Exactly. There you go. Exactly. I forgot to ask you, what are you working on exactly now? What projects are you working on? We know it's not commercial work, but
yeah, I would say that the overall trajectory has a lot to do with long-term thinking. So I'm quite influenced by a guy from Harvard called Steven Pinker. If anybody's interested, he wrote a book called Enlightenment Now. And basically he can show with really proper historical proof that if you look at things from a long-term perspective, pretty much any human development, with the one exception that would be global warming, but pretty much any human development, if you look at it from a long-term perspective, things are better now than they've been at any other time in the history of the world. And of course, that sounds very counterproductive and sort of even silly or Pollyanna to many people. But if you really look at the data, that's how it's been. If you look at, if you make a list of how to judge human development, you can judge it from health, longevity, child mortality, equality, literacy, almost any amount of people who die in wars, amount of people who die from brutality, from regular violence. All of these curves develop positively over a long period of time. And of course, the reason that many people find that surprising is because our media tells us the exact opposite. And this is not the media's fault, this is also our fault, because we just we basically take negative messages in so much easier than positive messages. Comes from our prehistoric ancestors who, if they didn't see the tiger, they were dead. If they didn't see the banana, well, it didn't really matter. You could see another banana 5 minutes later. So the price for not seeing something positive was a much smaller one than the price that you paid for not seeing something negative. And the media, of course, is in that situation. But the interesting part for me when I did the research was that the shorter term the media, the more negative it gets. And you can see that easily with Twitter, the most negative of all media. It's already, the New York Times is already more positive, the daily paper. But the New York Times also, and this is scientifically provable, got radically more negative since they have an online component.
I was going to say, yeah.
So the New York Times, print and online, the last 10 years, and you can actually, there is research on that shows, that just shows for the negative words, how often have they been used in the New York Times, and for the positive words, how often they have been used. It also goes radically down. Yeah. And you can also see, basically, if you look at a weekly paper like the New Yorker, is already more positive. But then if you really look at human development from a 20-year or 100-year perspective, it's much more positive, simply because you could write, for example, the headline that 150,000 people came out of absolute poverty today. That headline would have been a true headline for the past 20 years. But nobody gives a shit because it's a slow development, and it's something that basically most positive things develop slowly and are not really good news, while most negative things are catastrophically and happen in an instant, so they are better news. And so sorry, this was a long answer. So basically, I'm working in this space.
Okay.
And there is one leg of that is basically to make visual representations of that in some sort of, you could say, data visualizations, but they don't really look like data visualizations. But basically my desire is to make things pretty enough that somebody might want to hang it above the sofa as a reminder that the stuff that you just saw on Twitter does not mean at all that the world is becoming a worse place.
Nice.
And this is even very, very, very much true for this virus. If you compare Corona to any of the other big pests or flus that were going on historically. It's nothing. It got much, much, much better because we deal with it so much better. There's so much more science around. Even though, on the other hand, a virus has a so much more easier time to duplicate now worldwide because we are so much more connected. At the same time, because we know so much more, and our science is so much better, and even though so many of us from the daily media feel so many of our governments have failed us, in real life, if you compare it to, let's say something like the Spanish flu, we are dealing with it so much better. And the same even is true if you look at expectations. Let's say I have a Vespa and I drive around New York on the weekend, you see so many stores boarded up, mostly luxury stores, Louis Vuitton and all of those stores, so many of them are boarded up. Clearly, they expected riots to go on. They expected to be looted on the streets. I have to say, I'm kind of pissed at them because when I first saw them, it really was not only depressing, but it created this sense of danger. Well, now we know they were completely, utterly wrong. Not only is there no looting and no rioting, crime is actually down in an absolute sensational, in a never before seen way. We already had extremely low crime rates in New York City before, and those extremely low crime rates were cut by another 30–35%. So
we're much better off in all terms, in all areas, right?
I think that obviously I wouldn't go as far as saying New York is better off. It isn't. Obviously we've had crazy numbers of people dying. So I'm not saying this at all. But I would say in general, if in 5 years from now, we look at this Corona situation and compare it to to other historic epidemics, we will see that it was handled actually very well in comparison to other ones.
But somehow, like to synthesize this is because we're more attracted to bad things, and bad things sell more. No, that's somehow why we are manipulated by the media, because they are selling more newspapers and they're getting more clicks if they have like a big how would I say, headliners that are somehow that arise fear. No.
Yeah, I would say that. Of course, you can call this we are manipulated by the media, which I think is a totally valid point of view, but you could also say that we want this from the media.
Yes. We feel attracted to this, yes.
So I would think that if this wouldn't be in us, the media would be happy to give us positive views. The media basically gives us what we want, ultimately. And so I've seen a number of tries of media, of positive media, and I think so far they've mostly been unsuccessful. The most successful tries that I've seen have been made by a German weekly called Die Zeit. It's a quality weekly, it's a very large paper, and they do the regular news, and I would say the vast majority still is negative, but they more successfully and smarter than most other people that I know bring in positive news. And it seems to really work for them because they're very successful as a print media, which is, extreme. I don't have to tell you, is extremely unusual these days. So I think Die Zeit is within Germany maybe the most successful publication. And I think that their mix is much smarter than I've seen it anywhere else. They do it, for example, normally, I was always a big fan of the New York Times, but the Times does it much better.
Okay. What do you expect with your work? So what do you expect? Do you expect like to somehow help to change how what we feel attracted to? Is this the aim? Is this the objective?
No, I don't think that I could
No.
do that. I think that that's basically, this is, I think that this is very, very deep in us. I mean, we literally, this is in our DNA. You know, it comes from our prehistoric ancestors, and maybe over generations, we will be able to change that. But I don't think that this is something that, in my case, what I can do is I can be aware of that and then make a more proper choice of how much of this short-term media I really want to consume. In my case, that means zero Twitter, zero. It means that I'm more careful even with the daily news. And I really concentrate on maximum weekly news, or actually what I enjoy most is yearly or bi-yearly news, that I actually read about something that is, that I read books about a certain thing that came out a year after they have been happening. In that point, the whole sensationalism is already gone. And the person who wrote that book can really has a bigger oversight, can have some real judgments in hindsight. And it's, I feel that, I don't know, I feel that more informative ultimately than this daily zim, 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 zim thing. So I have to admit, in the very beginning of this crisis, I did listen to quite a bit of daily news, but I cut that down and got my Corona information from the daily podcast of a German scientist that I felt was a decent human being and a sophisticated scientist who would also go quite deep into those subjects. And I tried to limit my daily news intake.
So you said you're not spending time at all in Twitter, but you do in Instagram, where you're reviewing some of some artists' work. What is this project exactly? It's something like you feel you have to give back. It's something you enjoy doing. It's something you get inspiration from.
Well, I have to say, it all originated on a Sunday night that I was able to spend with Louis Bourgeois, the fantastic French-American artist, who was just incredibly generous and had a weekly salon at her brownstone here in Manhattan. And so every Sunday, 10 artists, in my case I was a designer, but mostly artists were able to come, and the only rules were they had to bring some of their work, and she would review their work. And I was there at one Sunday evening, and it was fantastic and totally brutal, meaning like she just completely ripped people apart. It was amazing. Like, I remember she told to one Japanese woman, "Why are you doing these things?" I mean, the poor woman, I am sure, stopped being an artist after that.
So everyone could go there and she would review. Everyone could go there.
There was a maximum of 10 people you had to call and sign up on the list. If it was 10 people, you could come next week or the week after, depending on how.
Oh my God. And you attended everything. You saw everything.
I was there once and I loved it. And I thought it was super helpful. And I basically just copied it. And then I did this in the studio, because we had also gotten a lot of mails from people, "Oh, can I come by to show my work?" And during the day, this was always a hassle because it's so time intensive. So I had mostly said no. After the Louis Bourgeois experience, I said, let's do this. We did a Monday evening salon, an hour and a half in the studio, in the meeting room. I think we had space for 12 people, so it was maximum for 12.
Nice.
I did that for many years and it worked well, and people liked it, like young designers liked it. And then my travel schedule got so crazy that this really wasn't possible anymore. Like and that meant that I switched it over to Instagram with all the advantages and disadvantages. You know, much bigger crowd, people can learn from other people. Disadvantage, of course, much less personal. You can't be quite so brutal because you're out in the open and it's like, you know, it's not nice to, if, you know, a couple of other 100,000 people notice that.
Yeah.
But I've definitely seen this, you know, this has been going on for years now. And I've definitely seen the interest being much increased during this time. I get much more work being sent. And I think there is bigger increases, bigger daily increases. So there's clearly, I think, a bigger need now than before. And it's pretty simple, meaning like, you know, people send me their work on a black or white background and I review it. And I try to be very short, obviously, because Instagram ultimately, it's a visual medium. So I also don't want to read essays when I'm on Instagram. So you want to read, I basically keep it as short as what I am comfortable to read on Instagram. 1 or 2 sentences. And I try how to be constructive, which I think I'm successful at, because what I'm extremely pleased, you know, obviously there's comments on Instagram, and the comments that from other people are also, I would say 99% of them constructive. Like you can really feel that everybody, when they give a tip, or everybody is basically having the best wherewithal of the person's work and that person's development in mind. And this is fantastic, because I think that that's the kind of criticism that if it comes to me, I can actually learn from. If somebody is commenting online about some piece of work of mine that says, oh, that fuckhead, he's a shithead, what bullshit is that? I don't learn from this. I'm offended by it, or it might actually bring me down, but I'm not learning, I'm not changing my ways. It's impossible from that also. So I find that this space actually works, it seems. And I've heard much feedback also even from, you know, faculty at design schools, that they follow it to see what I criticize, or maybe those criticisms is influencing their criticism. So it seems to work. Also, for me, it's not extremely time consuming. You know, I look at the work that comes in every day. It's kind of fun to look at. I select the pieces depending on well, quality. If it's great, I definitely want to show it. If it's bad, I only select it if I can make a bigger point about it, or if there's a good point that I feel other people could learn from, or if it's what actually are almost my favorite, if it has a lot of premise, but I see certain things that could be improved. Because I always feel that also in my own work, that there is a giant difference between stuff that I feel, oh, that's kind of good, or stuff that I'm excited about.
Yes. And
very often the difference between the two is elements that were pushed. Like it could be a formal element, it could be a color element, it could be that the idea hasn't been formulated as precisely as possible. It could be that the texture is wrong. It could be that maybe the materiality could be improved. You know, there's so many aspects to a single piece. And if there is 1 or 2 of those elements that are readily visible to me, I, of course, you know, point those out.
Imagine you would now get one piece to review from a Stefan when he was starting, when he was like 22 years old, 23 years old. Do you know what you would have taught him?
Oh, interesting. Yes, actually, I've I know quite a lot about the pieces that I did as a 18-year-old or 22-year-old, because I'm just on the side as an easy task in the afternoons and putting a new talk together, sort of like one that really is sort of like all about work. Because I haven't, when I do my presentations, you know, I talked about happiness and, you know, beauty, all other things, and showed very little of our work. And I thought it might be time to basically put a work-centric talk together. So I've just looked at a lot of really old work.
Nice.
And by let's say, I have a piece in mind that I did when I was 16. It was a poster for a magazine that I was working with, and I had shown, I talked all my my classmates in high school into lying on the floor in the break, not room. It was like the outside, like, you know, where the space outside of the school, and they formed a big anarchy A, like the A in the circle. And I photographed it from the
top.
A classmate, I don't even remember, probably a classmate photographed it from all the way above. And I've just gotten, I haven't seen that piece in ages, but I actually just gotten it from the local archive in Western Austria, from the city archive. They had a copy.
Wow.
And if I would get that sent in now by a young designer, oh my God, I would hate the typography. It was awful, awful, both in typographic choice and in placement. I think I might, the idea of having these people lie on the floor, these young people lie on the floor and form an A, I think at the time I thought it was quite original. And now I would critique it as derogatory, because I now know that that type made out of human form has been made in Holland. That would be interesting to see now. If that was earlier or later. But it's been made in Holland very famously, much more beautiful than I did it. Probably in that world 30 years ago, maybe 40 years ago. I would have to check. I for sure, as a 16-year-old, didn't know about that. Like, you know, I had no clue about graphic design. I had no access. This was, of course, there was no internet. I had no access as a high school student to the great designers of Holland. Also. But probably from my now perspective, I would see it as derivative, even though it wasn't actually. But I was typography heavy.
Everyone was dressed in the picture?
Yes, no nudity.
Not naked yet, no? That came later.
Exactly.
Great. What advice would you now give to a guy that is getting out of school?
Well, if that person is looking for a job, I would say, and okay, then let me ask about the question. Are you talking about specifically now after this world of Corona, or just in general getting out of it? Okay, so in general, I would say, think of, if you can, of ultimately where do you want to be in 10 years? If you can, if that's possible. Like, do you want to run your own studio? Do you want to work for a large company? Like, because that's a big difference. And so sort of envision that. If you want to work for a large company, definitely get a job at a large company right away. If you ultimately want to have your own studio, then look in your surrounding, or if you're willing to travel in the world, what kind of small studio would be the studio that you would want to run. And maybe select a number of those, 3 to 5, really research them, really check out their work, get to know everything you know there is to know about those, and then figure out how you, as a just graduated person, can possibly help those studios. And then apply very properly at those studios. Meaning, don't send them a form letter, don't send them a headline that says, "Dear sir, dear ma'am," or shit like this, but send a very personalized, very custom-made thing to these people and apply and tell them in your own words. Don't use any of these how to write a letter books. We know them all. Like, you know, sort of like, "I will be a valuable asset to your design company." Don't do all that shit. Write from your own heart and basically, and I think most importantly, when you apply, try to think it through from their point of view. Like, try to think, if you would be running the studio, what would you be looking at? Like, for example, when we are looking for designers, what I never want is somebody who is like me. I'm already like me. I can do that shit. I don't need somebody to work with me who can do the stuff that I can do. That's exactly the person that I don't need at all. What I want to work with is a person that knows and can do things that I cannot do. But ultimately, of course, maybe has similar goals. You know, in my case or our design company, be it or when I was Sagmeister Inc. or when it was Sagmeister and Bolch, definitely was to basically create designs that are touching some emotional core. Of course, it would be important that the person also has these goals, but is able to use tools or techniques or possibilities that I myself or that Jessica could not use. And but I think this stands to look at things from the other point of view is super important. And we actually, this was a tip that a headhunter once gave to me when I was studying. And I found it maybe the most important thing I learned in art school. Because we also always did this with clients. You know, when we talk to clients, we never say, "Oh, this piece won this award and this piece won that award." Nobody gives a shit. We basically, when we talk to clients, we try to understand what is it that we can help them with.
Okay. What would you say, Stefan, you are best at? What is your big talent?
I think I can look at a fairly big piece of information or at a whole segment, you know. I mean, I think also that's why we could do ultimately big subjects like happiness or beauty. I mean, subjects don't get much bigger.
No.
I mean, and basically look at that subject and figure out how to like really narrow that down into something that's communicatable in a hopefully functioning view, meaning in a functioning point of way, so that you can learn something from it, and hopefully in a delightful sort of way that you can, you know, that you are entertained while doing so. I think I mean, I also think that that's ultimately almost the definition of graphic design. But that's also why I really like being a graphic designer, because I feel I'm quite good at that. Like I can actually do that. And it's, I think it's a wonderful thing to be able to be involved in, yes.
What do you, like your work, it transmits a lot of passion. So what do you think of passion? Were you born passionate, or do you think passion is something that comes along the way with the work?
Ask me again, I didn't quite get it.
Passion is something that you're born with it, or passion is something you work for? you get it on the way while you're working?
I think I'm not sure if I can make that clear distinction. Meaning, I would say as a person, I'm not sure if I'm extremely passionate. Like, I was born in the very western part of Austria, where the people are probably more Swiss than they're Austrian. So I would say from a cultural heritage point of view, probably a more Swiss outlook, working hard, being responsible, diligently, something that I think I also saw in Japan possibly, but I would also, I would say that if I can make these sort of large judgments, I would say that when I was in Tokyo, I didn't feel that people were incredibly passionate, nor do I have that feeling if I go through the pedestrian zone in Zurich or Basel. It's more like people are a bit reserved. And I would say that in general, I'm definitely coming out of that culture. Maybe I'm more passionate than the average people there, but in the world in the big wild world, I don't know if I compare myself to many Italians, I'm probably not so passionate. But I think I'm passionate about design, that's for sure.
Okay.
And have been for a long while, meaning I was one of those lucky people that knew what they wanted to do at a very early age, and was involved in some sort of design endeavor pretty much since I was 15 or 16. And meaning like their stuff actually got printed, or I make that as a measurement. Like when was the first time where I designed something, it got printed, it hung somewhere, and it made a difference. Meaning like you could see, oh, these 300 people came to that event only because they saw that poster that I designed. And I think that sort of functionality part of design was always close to my heart. I myself have to say, I've never aspired to become an artist. I always was close to this. I very much think that design has to be much more than just functionality. I think if all that design does is solve a problem, then it's engineering. It's another thing, and it can be engineered well or not so well. But I'm totally against this stance in the graphic design world where people think, "Oh, I'm a problem solver." No, problem solving is part of it, and of course it needs that. But I think that then it needs to have much more that to be called good design. Light, joy, whatever it might be. Even if you choose, it can also be disgust, or it can also be horror or shock. Meaning all of those things are fine.
Okay, I'll do one more question, and then I'll go on to answer some of the questions that we've been getting along the way. How important is for you your career, Stefan?
Well, I'd like to. I think that even doesn't come from me. Somebody else who I don't remember now. I would love to give that person credit. So I really talked about your work life as you can look at it as a calling.
As a what?
As a calling.
Okay.
Where you basically would do it also if you wouldn't get paid. It's just basically in you. Then you can look at it as a career where you're definitely engaged, but you have in the back of your mind, there is sort of this voice that says, is all that hard work really worth your while? And then you can look at it as a job where you basically do it from 9 to 5 and you hope on Wednesday that it's Friday pretty soon because you can't wait until the weekend comes around. So job, career, and calling. And I can say that I definitely went into design when I studied it as a calling. I really wanted to do that. And then throughout my working life, it sometimes deteriorated into a career and probably sometimes even into a job. Like there were definitely times, I remember back in Hong Kong, where I couldn't wait for the weekend. And if we had a weekend, because so many weekends we also would work through, but if there was a weekend inside, we couldn't wait for that to happen. And I don't think, meaning at least for me, it's not possible that for the entire length of my working life, I can see what I'm doing as a calling, but I can put measurements and strategies in to elongate those calling periods significantly. For me, by far, 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 the most successful strategy was the sabbaticals. Meaning those sabbaticals, much more so than anything else that I did, made sure that I still felt about my working life as a calling. And that's because I did the things that I really wanted to do. And then, of course, I think that in all of our lives, meaning plays a very big role. You know, I mean, I think that everybody I've ever met, ultimately, it's more important to them that their job is meaningful than that it's high paying. Most people that I talk to feel that way. And that's not because they are such good people. I think that we are like that as human beings, that we want to have the work to be meaningful. And I would say that the easiest definition of meaning to me is still, does it help somebody and does it delight somebody? And if it does both, then that job was meaningful. I checked all of the things I've ever done in my life against those two little criteria, and it's 100% true. The jobs that I look back to in hindsight, and I can say, yes, actually, that helped somebody, and that thing, it delighted somebody, bingo, worthwhile to do. I feel, and if it didn't do, and of course, I was also did jobs that did neither, and I don't know why I did them. It was I mean, yes, I got probably because I got paid for them, which is, you know, also a fine reason.
Thanks a lot, Stefan. It was great to have you here. You're always inspiring. You make us wiser. And we haven't had enough time. I knew that already because it's very inspiring to hear to you. So there's lots of questions left. We have to talk about your books too. So I propose we make a part 2 of this interview. I hope to see you soon. Thank you.